When it comes down to movies that I remember watching, a mass majority of them all belong to franchises. You know, it's the individual standalone films that are the most susceptible for me eventually forgetting them altogether. For The Mummy Returns, this was a movie that I knew that I saw, but I forgot nearly everything about it since then, and it turns out that there's a reason why. What's up, guys? Today I'm continuing on my journey of the Mummy series of review rewatches, and once again joined by my buddy Jacob Martin. If you're unfamiliar with him or his channel, he's also a YouTuber that reviews tons and tons of movies every single day. He's got a movie channel, he's got a book channel, both of which I'll leave a link to in the description box below for you to all check out and send him some love. But without further ado, let's chat about The Mummy Returns. The Mummy Returns in The Mummy Returns, which is now the year of the Scorpion, and before long the fabled Scorpion King will return from the dead and just attack everything. To defeat him, a group of cult members plan to resurrect Imhotep again because he's the only thing that can defeat the Scorpion King. But there's a catch. In order to defeat the Scorpion King, Imhotep would essentially take its place, making him more powerful than he already was. And we can't have that. So first of all, thank you once again to Jacob for joining me today's review. We'll be hearing what he has to say about The Mummy Returns in just a hot second! First, here's some of my general thoughts on this movie. Like I said, I didn't really remember that much about it, and for good reason. A lot of this film is simply rehashing things done in the first one. So a lot of it doesn't even feel original, or honestly balanced as well in terms of action, horror, adventure. The action's there, the adventure is there I suppose, but there's not really a sense of horror anymore, which is unfortunate. And even the elements of action or adventure, they're just not as good. The best parts of this movie are honestly any part with The Rock. Now, obviously, The Mummy Returns is often regarded as an example of the worst CGI in any given movie. I'll talk about that after Jacob's portion, but his character is actually pretty good. It's very interesting. If they didn't rehash everything with Imhotep, there would be no doubt in my mind that the real villain of the film would be The Rock as the Scorpion King, and it would feel a lot more original because of that. Now, the moments in this movie that connected it to the first film, I thought that they were actually pretty interesting. Like, you see the first scene of the first Mummy movie from a different vantage point. And I love when movies do this because it makes for a really intriguing expansion of something that we've already seen. And I liked how they also expanded on the character of Ankh-Su-Namun. So, I don't know how you say her name, but the mummy's girlfriend. In the first film, she said something like, "Only you can resurrect me." But you never see her again until this movie, so her existence makes sense. So if it was like a revenge film, where her character is finally resurrected, and then she brings on the return of the Scorpion King to attack Brendan Fraser's character, that would make more sense to me. And that's how I would probably write it. But for what it is, it's fine. It's just not as good as it could be. Now, before I go on, here's what Jacob had to say about The Mummy Returns.
What's going on, Dave and all his viewers? Thank you, Dave, for having me on your channel once again, going through all of these Mummy movies. And today, we're talking about the sequel to the 1999 Mummy, The Mummy Returns, released 2 years later in 2001, once again starring people like Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and Arnold Vosloo. This was once again directed by Stephen Sommers, who directed the first movie, and this sequel has always been off to me, because while I love the first Mummy movie, and it was great they got the same director and crew back on this sequel, this one felt like they were really trying to rush a sequel into production and cram as many story elements as possible to fast track a sequel because the first was such a surprise hit. And it really shows in the story department. There's fun to be had in the sequel, yes. Brendan Fraser is still awesome as Rick O'Connell, and I love the banter with him, and Rachel Weisz as Evie. There's great stuff with that. I like seeing Jonathan have a little bit of a larger role in this movie, and he was one of the standouts in the first movie. I love seeing that comical energy that he brings in all these Mummy films. There's fun action set pieces in this movie. I'd argue this is more action-centric than horror-centric. There's a couple of horror elements sprinkled in it, but it's not as prevalent as in the first movie. The action is pretty fun. I like seeing some of these fantastical mummified creatures in London, and there's a fun sequence on a double-decker bus. I'd say that's probably the standout in this movie. I love it when our characters are taking on these pygmy creatures that we see in this oasis scene that we see near the end of the movie. But the storytelling is very all over the place. This movie, we have Rick and Evie. It's set several years after the first movie, and we find that they have a son in this movie. He's about 9 or 10 years old. And I think this kid will either make this movie or break this movie for you, because this kid's pretty annoying. There's no way of getting around that. I've never been a fan of this kid. Nothing against the child actor. I don't know what he's done post Mummy Returns. Hopefully he's done good things in his life. But his acting just came off as very one note to me. The character didn't really do much. He's just so annoying throughout the course of the movie. I like that the kid has a sense of intelligence to him, as he's the son of Rick and Evie, and you see both of the character traits of his parents in this kid, but you don't really feel that with his performance, and that's what hurts this character at the end of the day. Also, you can tell they just crammed so many story ideas into the sequel, and it just comes off as overblown sequel white noise. What I mean by that is there's so many plot elements in this movie. You got Rick and Evie and their son. You set up this storyline involving the Scorpion King, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in his first ever movie, fun fact. Then you have characters reviving Imhotep, the mummy. And there's storylines where you got, Rick wants to destroy the Scorpion King just to save the world. But no, the mummy wants to destroy the Scorpion King so he can control the army for himself. And for a good chunk of the movie, I'm like, why do you have the mummy back when you got two different characters with similar goals destroying the Scorpion King? And then they set up, he wants the armies for himself at the end. And I'm like, that's the only reason you got him there. And you can tell they also want to do a lot of rehashed elements from the first movie. And they do a lot of callbacks and fan servicey moments to that. And they just came off as forced and redundant this time. It's weird because a decent story idea, I like the setup of the Scorpion King, but that's put on the back burner until the very end of the movie. And then there's these random plot elements that just come out of nowhere and make no sense. The movie addresses that Rick has a tattoo on his arm, which is the same tattoo that those Egyptian bodyguards have, and there's a twist. Rick is a magi, like those bodyguard characters. One, he did not have a tattoo in the first movie, so they just completely made that up for this movie, and it makes no sense. And if you thought that was dumb, what about this twist? That Evie is actually a reincarnated version of an Egyptian character, the Pharaoh's daughter, who was actually there during the events of the prologue in the first movie with Imhotep and Anck-su-namun. That was stupid, and it stretched itself very thin, and they were trying to set this rivalry between her and Anck-su-namun because there's a reincarnated Anck-su-namun in this movie, and it came out of nowhere, and it didn't really amount to much, so I don't really get why that was there. And also, the CGI in this movie is really rough. I will say the CGI in this movie is worse than the CGI in the first movie, and I think it's all goes back to that rush production. The effects artists, I don't think had time to polish the effects in this movie, and some of the effects in this movie are rough. Again, when there's practical stuff, when they go to real locations and there's real stunt work, that stuff is all cool and I enjoy that. But some of the CGI in this movie, I'll argue, looks worse. Even when we see the mummy walk around, he looks faker in this movie than in the first movie. And we got, they try to do the recreation of how the mummy uses a wall of sand to try to push our main characters away from the spotlight. And that was a cool scene in the first movie. Well, he does the same thing but with water. And it looks bad. It looks like the stuff of nightmares. I don't know what the creatives were thinking on that one. And then I gotta highlight the Scorpion King at the end of the movie. And what am I even watching? That is one of the most horrifying, terribly looking CGI renderings I've ever seen in my life. That doesn't even look like it's gone past the development stage. It looks like a rough cut visual effect that you see on like this old school video game. I have no words on this. So The Mummy Returns is a mixed bag personally. There's enjoyable aspects in it. I like the action especially. It's fun seeing these characters back on screen. But the story hurts this movie for me. The story is nowhere as consistent as in the first movie. Stuff is set up that has absolutely no payoff. They cram so much stuff in this movie to where it's over-crammed and overstuffed. The CGI is a mess, and all around this movie definitely falls flat. It's nowhere as good as the first movie. But if you just want to turn your brain off popcorn movie, I guess this will work for you. But for me, it's definitely a big step down compared to how awesome the first Mummy movie was. So at the end of the day, I'll be giving The Mummy Returns a 3 out of 5 stars, and on the 100-point scale, it's getting a 59 out of 100. So thank you, Dave, for having me back on your channel once again, talking about The Mummy Returns. Nowhere as good as the first, but it's still kind of fun to watch at times. But I'm sure Dave will leave a link in the description below where you can check out my YouTube channel where I also do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, and other fun stuff along the way. I can't wait to be on your next collab review. We'll be talking about The Scorpion King, like the prequel spin-off movie, where we get to see more of The Rock as the Scorpion King. Hopefully we won't see any more of that CGI abomination nonsense in his movie, but we'll see how that goes. I won't hog up too much of your time, Dave, so back to you. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this sequel.
Thank you to Jacob once again for joining me today. I'll be honest, man. I'd have to say that we pretty much agree on all the major points. So again, guys, links to his channel are found in my description box below. Go check him out, give him some love, and tell him who sent ya. Without further ado, more of my thoughts on The Mummy Returns. So yeah, the CGI in this movie, hot garbage! Jacob hit it on the head in his portion. The Scorpion King moment at the end of this film is often regarded as Hollywood's worst moment of CGI, which is why I'm so blown away by the mere fact that not only did they make an entire movie surrounding his character, but also just how popular and how big The Rock became after this. But in a way, I am glad because I was intrigued by the character of the Scorpion King, and I wish he was more prominent in the film than he was, which just ended up being a tacky boss level type character. You simply don't care about that character whatsoever because of that. Jacob also mentioned the child in the movie, who was the son of Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz's character. Again, you're 100% right, man. This kid is annoying, and he's one note. I try to look at it one way. Because the series seems to take so many nods from Indiana Jones, I looked at this character like the Mummy's version of Short Round. Both kids, both get in the way, both technically important for the story, but without them, the story would probably be significantly more simplified and definitely not as annoying. Overall, though, one of my major issues is that I recently watched the 2022 movie Death on the Nile, which also takes place in Egypt, and a lot of the same locations. Death on the Nile, though, either was Egypt, or it looked realistic enough to believe that that's where they shot it. And it was gorgeous. But because the graphics in this movie just weren't up to snuff, and it looked as bad as they did, made Egypt itself look pretty fake. It's not a bad movie. I feel like I've been making that point. It's definitely not bad. It's okay. But it's definitely not as good as the first. And because it rehashes as much as it does, complicating a story that really never needed to be that complicated, there's just almost no reason to watch it in the first place. But sure, I mean, there are some good action set pieces, as Jacob mentioned. The double-decker scene was fun, but none of it compared to the first. Not a single moment. So with that being said, let's take a look at my final score. From a technical vantage point, my unbiased score isn't very good because obviously it has some known issues. It's known for bad CGI, for instance. The story is all over the place. It rehashes a ton of stuff. So it has originality issues. But in the same breath, it is always great to see Brendan Fraser do his thing. He makes this series work. So it's not a horrible unbiased score, but it definitely could have been better at 66%. My biased score, or just how I personally felt about The Mummy Returns, because it got so complicated for no reason, and because the CGI kind of sucks, and because it did little else but rehash everything, I got bored. I felt the runtime. I suddenly realized why I consider it to be forgettable in the first place, because once again, I feel like it's forgettable again. Overall, I don't know if I'll ever feel the need to rewatch it again unless I'm doing another series rewatch. So this bias score is actually 42%, meaning that when we combine the two scores together, we come to the final rating of 54%. 54 out of 100 possible stars. Or on my letter grading system, it's a D+ letter grade. So, it passes, but it just misses a failing letter grade because it just runs into a ton of issues, and you can't avoid that. Maybe you're right, Jacob. Maybe they needed more time to flesh out a better sequel. I don't know. But until next time, guys, let me know your thoughts on The Mummy Returns in the comment section down below. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out!